Canaletta there, I wonder. Yeah. Anyway, so you come in for this conference, particularly, right? And it's swinging along down there pretty well now, right? Have they got 1,000 people or so, or?
That's what they claim, and it's spread out over the NYU campus.
Right. Well, it's needed, that's for sure. This is the second one, right? Welcome very much to Conversations, where I'm pleased to welcome to the program, well, Dr. Robert McCHESNEY. He's the author of books on the media, and one of them being corporate media and the threat to democracy. And he has another one you wrote with Mr. Herman called, what was that?
The Global Media, the New Missionaries of Corporate Capitalism.
All right, good enough. And he's here in New York for the Media and Democracy Conference that's being held now in the late October 1997. And Bob McCHESNEY, welcome very much to Conversations and to New York.
My pleasure to be here.
And I might say to our new studios at Manhattan Neighborhood Network.
Gorgeous here.
Yeah, it is good for the access world and that sort of thing. I wonder if you can, maybe you could share your own background a little bit for us, because I know you're interested in the media, but could you share a little of your own, maybe academic or personal background?
Sure, I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin. I teach in journalism, and I've been there 9 or 10 years, and I've written several books and articles on media and media issues, the two you just mentioned, and then I wrote a long history on the origins of commercial broadcasting in the United States that was published in 1993 by Oxford, called Telecommunications, Mass Media, and Democracy. And what I did in that book is there's been sort of a myth that corporate-run, commercially supported media was something inherent to America, that we had sort of in our bloodstream or our gene pool, that we have to have this type of media system. And what I discovered was that when commercial broadcasting came along in the 1920s and 1930s, there was widespread opposition to it from across the political spectrum in this country. And a lot of people organized to try to set up a nonprofit, non-commercial system. You know, I won't keep you in suspense. They lost, but it was still very interesting to me.
As they had in other parts of the world, they've set up that kind of a system, haven't they, in many parts of the world?
Yeah, the U.S. was the anomaly at the time.
Yeah, it was.
Virtually every other country in the world that had radio broadcasting at the time, Britain, Canada, Germany, other places, set up nonprofit, non-commercial systems of one variety or another.
What was the rationale behind setting up a nonprofit thing? Or is the BBC included in that? Or
Oh, certainly.
It is.
Oh, absolutely.
What is the rationale that's presented for that kind of a system as opposed to a commercially oriented kind of one that seems to have emerged in this country?
Well, at that time, the rationale was that there's a scarce amount of space for broadcasting. There only is room for a few broadcasters in any given country, and that it would be unfair to let just some private institution have the access to the public mind like that. That better be run publicly in some sort of democratically accountable mechanism rather than a commercial mechanism beholden only to owners and advertisers.
Yeah, and that would be able to serve the public interest better.
That was the thinking.
And that was able to establish itself as a norm in the on the world pattern. If we begin to look at,
I would say it was pretty much the norm early on, and it still is the norm to a significant extent in many countries of the world, although it has been under strong pressure, especially in the last decade, to shift to a purely market-driven commercial system.
Right. Okay. Now we have communications and so forth. We have patterns that have evolved. Anything where you say there's the bandwidth spectrum and there's a shortage and so forth. Economics, in a certain sense, is the allocation of scarce resources. That's the theory of what economics is about. So steel, automobiles, petroleum, these kind of things, you're going to be able to exploit these things in an economic pattern because you're allocating scarce resources. In the case of communication, I don't know if we can back up before broadcast communication, but we had printing presses, and we did set up postal systems and so forth, which is original kind of communication system. We have we don't have a private sector postal service in this country. We've set up a government use of for communication in the postal system. Some of those were some of the background to seeing. Do we see communications differently than we do the normal patterns of economic development and other aspects of the economy?
Well, one of the interesting things about American media history is that we have an image that especially is given to us by the PR agents of the corporate media, that they were sort of built up through the hard sweat of entrepreneurial leaders without any government interference. When in fact, really going back even before the time of independence, our media firms and our major media have received massive direct and indirect government subsidies. And in fact, their only complaint with government involvement is when it might impede profitability. They've been wildly in favor of government involvement when it would help them. Subsidies at the post office for mailing were crucial to the success of the magazine and newspaper industries in this country. And that was a direct subsidy by the public to the media industries of the 19th and 20th century. It still exists today.
So were the communications seen differently than economics in general, which again, back to that idea of there's scarce resources in all fields, and people would say that it's better in the private sector for the profit motive, it's going to be more effective and efficient. People will make that argument in a capitalist mode. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think what happened with the media in the society is that it's only in the 20th century that it's seen as a purely corporate-driven, profit-motivated, commercial enterprise, purely. In fact, at the time of the First Amendment was drafted and passed in 1791, and in the first really 50 years of this country's history, we had a press system that would be unrecognizable by contemporary standards. It was a partisan press system.
Yes.
Almost all the newspapers were subsidized by political parties. They weren't out to make money first and foremost. And in fact, many of the papers received subsidies from the government for printing contracts. So you actually had a government subsidized press system in this country for the first 50 years. And then even in the late 19th century, our newspaper system was commercial. It was run by capitalists trying to make money. But it was a vastly more competitive system than we have now, and really quite different than what we have today. So in our modern day press lords, the Time Warners and the Viacoms and the news corporations, these enormous $20 billion a year conglomerates that own all myriad of media interest, when they claim to be the natural heirs of the First Amendment, it's really a bogus argument, because the First Amendment was all about protecting freedom of press, political speech, people concerned with democracy. The owners of our current media have no more interest in democracy than the owners of our automobile manufacturing companies or the owners of our insurance companies. The investors are interchangeable. They're mostly interested in just making money.
But they'll use that argument to their own advantage.
Obviously.
Yeah,
and they do.
Yeah, and they do. And
but they hold democracy in contempt. It's something they have no interest in whatsoever except to protect the bottom line.
And it's interesting, too, because the Supreme Court has backed up the idea of, we're in political finance reform now, and they're saying that they want to vouchsafe the giving of money to political parties in the name of the First Amendment. That's an argument that's going to probably come up in the public dialogue. I mean,
well, I think that, the First Amendment, regrettably, has been turned on its ear. I mean, I think Orwell would be amused by our current utilization of it.
Yeah, and the Newspeak and the things that are there. Yeah, so we're going, but have you been primarily concerned with electronic media in terms of your purview, or are you looking at the press in broad general
I'd say...
terms? And are there important distinctions?
I think the distinction there are important distinctions, but if you're looking at our media system today, I look at it from the vantage point of people who own our media system, and our owners own everything. We don't have pure newspaper companies or pure broadcast companies anymore. We have a media system that has shrunk from 50 dominant firms, which was a scandal then in the early 1980s, after 15 years of mergers and acquisitions, to 10 firms. Really dominating our entire media culture in this country. There's maybe another 10 firms rounding out the dominant positions, 20 at the outside.
So it's shrinking.
And it's shrinking, and the dominant firms, a firm like Time Warner or Disney, isn't a dominant player in one media sector. Take Time Warner, for example. They're among the 3 largest producers in this country or in the world of book publishing, magazines, music, television shows. Motion pictures. They're the largest cable company now in the United States. They've just nudged out TCI.
Really?
They're the largest cable channel company. They've got all those Turner channels, CNN, HBO, Turner Network Television. They've got amusement parks. They've got retail stores. The second largest movie theater owning company in the world. This is the modern media corporation. This is the truth of our free press. Enormous transnational firms that are out to make as much money as possible with a myriad of interests. Sometimes in the cases of companies like Disney or General Electric, they're companies that have vast non-media interests as well that are only loosely related, if at all, to media. They're major corporate players in the global economy with distinct self-interest in the outcome of the most important issues of the day on trade, taxes, regulation. And they really dominate our journalism and our entertainment.
Yeah, and that's becoming increasingly important in terms of the national consciousness on issues. Some people say it's like a fourth branch of our government process. In fact, it's more important with people being so involved with the media in terms of shaping public opinion. It's an extremely important part of the governance, in a loose sense, of this economy and a view of the world, isn't it?
Well, I think that's almost a self-evident point, but it's not a recent point. I mean, at the time of independence, it was well understood that the foundation of participatory democracy is having a viable press system that informs people and helps them participate. So that's something that all democratic theory has taken at the assumption level, and that's no different today. I think what's different today from that era and from any other era is that the media plays such an incessant role in our life. On one hand, they surround us and engulf us. And secondly, those media are owned by fewer and fewer people who are primarily interested in carpet bombing us with commercial messages.
Yeah, and they do. And they think of it differently. They think of television programming as commercials in which they put some programming. We tend to think of programming as around which there are commercials.
Yeah.
But it's the other way around in that world.
It's all about carpet bombing us with commercials.
And they're doing it. And they're doing it increasingly and incessantly, as you say. This concentration, Ben Bagdikian has written so well on that. He wrote, I think, The Media Monopoly, and he's tracked this very, very well, bless him, and so forth. This increased concentration. Do you think there's more concentration of the media? Some people, to back off a little to broad political patterns, there is a tendency for there to be a concentration of ownership of the capital assets of this capitalist system in fewer and fewer hands in general. I think it's probably 5% of the population, 10 on an individual basis to own the capital assets that make up our economy. Is it worse in the media than it is in the economy in general, do you think?
I really don't know.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I know this, though. I mean, approximately 1% of our population owns roughly 50% of the financial wealth.
Yeah, almost.
The bottom 80% of our population owns 6% of the financial wealth.
Right.
And I think it's safe to say that the primary owners of these 10 largest media firms come from that 1%, not the bottom 80%.
Right.
And I think it's safe to say that therefore you'd logically expect these firms to represent have the worldview and represent the interest of the owners of this country, not the workers of the country or the rest of the country.
Yeah, so it's really a matter of those at the top are really running things in a world, and they're beginning to become global now in their outreach. I mean, we hear now about the emergence of the global economy, and these entities are beginning to get a global overview in terms of the communications and so forth, so that's part of the pattern as well, I guess.
Well, in fact, what it is that the globalization of the world economy that we often talk about, globalization of media is a central part of it.
Sure.
In fact, what we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years at a global basis has been the rise for the first time of a fully global integrated commercial media market. And it's really dominated by 9 or 10 firms. That's what Herman and I write about in the global media.
Yes.
These are mostly U.S.-based, but not exclusively U.S.-based firms. And they're central to the whole process of a global economy because the primary element of it is global commercial television, which is really the exploding area of media. And this is necessary to create global markets with advertising to sell goods. And that's really where the expansion is across the world right now.
Yeah.
So they're hand in hand. If you talk about the global media, it goes right in hand with the global political economy.
Yeah. Back again to the fact we had the BBC, the tradition of the BBC, and other post and telegraph systems and so forth around the country that had a strong governmental influence or public influence.
Yeah.
What's the pattern in that on let's say, in this country? I mean, it's eroding, that the import. But what about on a world pattern? We still have the BBC, we still have some examples, or are they in retreat to this juggernaut, if that's the right word, of the global media entities and influence?
Well, the answers are yes and yes. They still exist. Public broadcasting and media systems exist around the world, but they are also in retreat.
Yeah.
Now, public systems in places like Canada and Britain and Germany and India and Japan started on a much stronger footing than public broadcasting did in the U.S. I mean, we've never really had public broadcasting in this country, and
this company town, right?
But at the same time, today we have nothing even close to public broadcasting in NPR and PBS because they get roughly 15% of their funds from public money, and the rest comes from government corporate handouts, viewer and listener donations. Yeah. So it's really not public broadcasting in the traditional sense of the term.
They used to say petroleum broadcasting.
Yeah.
Back in the days when petroleum was so...
In countries like Britain and Germany and Canada, the dominant public broadcaster saw its mission as serving the entire society.
Yes.
In this country, that was never, and that's the way it has to be for public broadcasting to be viable and successful. It can't just be a niche service.
Yeah.
In this country, on the other hand, since the commercial interests were able to dominate and expel nonprofit broadcasters who pioneered the medium, it's worth pointing out.
Interesting.
Since they were able to expel them, when nonprofit broadcasting came back, it could only do the stuff the main guys couldn't make money on. They weren't allowed to do broadcasting for the entire population. They were only allowed to broadcast stuff that the commercial interests couldn't make any money off of doing. They were allowed to do the educational stuff, the stuff there wasn't much of an audience for.
Yeah.
And if they tried to do the stuff that the big-time broadcasters, NBC and CBS, did, then they get in political trouble in Washington. The commercial broadcasters say, what do we have these guys competing with us for with government subsidy?
Yeah.
So public broadcasting in this country was handicapped at the outset. It was sort of in a no-win situation. It had to do the stuff there wasn't much of an audience for.
Right.
And then no one ever wanted to really watch it or listen to it very much because it was pretty lame.
What about the arguments that they'll make? They'll say that the public broadcasting, whether it's BBC or public broadcasting or something, that's geared toward an elite. That's geared toward a cultural elite, that it is not mass-produced programming is sort of like the same kind of argument for a quality newspaper as opposed to tabloids, and that people really, in a democratic, participatory democratic nation, you give them a choice and they will read, you know, the tabloid. They will not look at good quality programming, and it's an elite proposition.
Well, in the U.S. situation, it was built right into the system. Obviously, if you can only do the stuff you can't make money off of, well, the public broadcasters in this country were then put in the position, well, I said, well, what can we do? We can't do the stuff that there's any audience for. Well, the logical thing to do is to do stuff that was for the elite, because then they can at least give you money because they're rich. And those fund drives, you aren't going to do bowling shows for people. For poor people, can't give you any money for fund drives. So the U.S. broadcasters were forced into that role whether they wanted to or not. They might have gone voluntarily. But I think it's inaccurate and misleading to say that public broadcasters by definition were elitist. They might have had that component, or paternalist might be a better term. Even today, with widespread commercial competition, the public broadcasting systems in countries like Britain and Italy and Germany and Sweden and Norway and even India and Japan are either the leading or the second leading broadcasters in their markets. They're invariably among the most popular broadcasters, and no one's putting a gun at the heads of viewers saying you've got to watch them. And they're getting 30, 35, 40% of the national market. So, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that nonprofit, non-commercial broadcasting can be responsive to an audience without having to follow commercial cues.
Oh, that's really
if it wants to.
Oh, that's really interesting. It is. Do they get?
Yeah, of course. Our commercial broadcaster in this country would have you believe that anything except General Electric owning things is Darkness at Noon and gulags and assassinations and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And would they? And those public services up in Scandinavia or wherever they are able to do that, are they able to compete on a world scale with, let's say, if we bring into it movies, we bring into it the whole full range of entertainment and so forth? It seems to me that the American product, one of our largest products that we export to a world that accepts it on the terms of what they have available to them. They put all kinds of movies out in India and Egypt and so forth that they can go and see. But the overwhelming source of, some people call it cultural imperialism and so forth, but is that the people accept Rambo and other kinds of things that come out of Hollywood and out of the entertainment industry in the United States on their own terms and in market terms. Is that true? Or what do we say to that?
It's a half-truth.
Okay.
And, I mean, there's clearly a marked popularity of some Hollywood fare or American fare. I think most studies show that people in various countries around the world would prefer domestically produced fare, given their druthers. Then why don't they get it?
Yeah.
Well, the market, it's so much easier. American companies have a domestic market, established commercial market of 250 or 260 million people. Then they make a film and can go overseas with it, and they've got a $100 million film. That, you know, they're already making money in the U.S., and they can go and sell it real cheap in Nigeria or India or Belgium. If a Belgian filmmaker wants to make a film, how are they going to compete with that sort of operation? They have a little domestic market of 10 million or 15 million people. And then they're going to try to go out and compete. It quickly goes to the most powerful firms. That's why U.S. firms tend to dominate. You
don't think it's the argument of the people in the film industry and that sort of thing would be that we make product that people want to see. We don't make, Tosca, and we don't make opera and Hamlet and things because people en masse don't want to see that.
Slow down.
Okay.
They aren't making Hamlet in Belgium. They're making commercial entertainment too. I mean, it's not like they're trying to ram some opera down people's throats. They're trying to make escapist.
Well, all more than the argument is that even though they're trying to do that, but in that competitive marketplace, the people here would argue for the industry as it exists, the the large conglomerates who make product and so forth like that. They'll argue that we make product, we put it out on the market, and the reason people go to see Rambo is because that's what they want to see. They don't want to see, thank you very much, programming that perhaps some elite group of culturally advantaged people think they ought to see. That argument is one that's traditional.
Okay, you're shifting that argument. This system gives the people what they want.
Yeah, that kind of thing is what they'll say.
As opposed to the global thing. You want to talk about the U.S. situation now?
Well, we could both, in a certain sense, but I was thinking globally, but or it would apply to domestically as well. They'll make that same argument.
Well, it's a crucial argument. I agree. And the notion that the commercial media gives the people what they want.
Right.
It's the main myth or half-truth that really girds the system. It's ideological underpinnings, because if you accept that argument, if you think it's credible, then you can't hardly blame the global media giants for what you're getting. It's our fault. If the stuff that we're getting is garbage, it's because we're morons who demand garbage.
Right, that's what they, in a certain sense, they'll say.
Yeah,
and let the invisible hand will bring us what we want, and that is, after all, democracy, and it shouldn't have to answer to
it. Time out. That's
democracy
in their worldview.
Yes, that's what they would say.
No, that's right. That's the line you get. And I think that's important to talk about that. I
Yeah,
think that's a really central issue of media criticism.
Sure.
Do the media giants, are they forced to give the people what they want through competitive pressures? I mean, that's the central issue. Is that true?
And if they don't, they'll go out of business, they'll say.
That's right.
Yeah.
So there's tremendous pressure on them, and in certain ways, and I've been a media publisher, no publisher or producer thinks they aren't trying to satisfy their audience. None of them says, yeah, I don't care about the audience. I think they see themselves as an incessant competition to do that. But in fact, though, the system doesn't necessarily give the people what they want. There are really a lot of basic holes in that argument. For one thing, the notion of the market being one where the demand dictates supply, in economic principles, that's a purely competitive market. We have anything but a purely competitive market. We have a market in which the suppliers have tremendous influence over the content and the price in economic terms, which is one where basically they can really dictate to demand. So they can basically give the people what they can make the most money off of with little concern about too much competition forcing them to do anything else. And then when the people consume it, they tell them they're getting what they want. It's a Say's law says supply creates demand in a situation like this.
Yeah, but it isn't.
And that's one of the reasons why they produce so much stuff that doesn't make money, because they're producing stuff they think will make lots of profit, but the audience doesn't want it. You think if these guys were so expert at reading audiences, at taking their commands, they'd be producing smash after smash. But there are lots of other problems, and let's just talk about them. This idea that markets are this magical democratic enterprise that give the people what they want.
Particularly interesting to introduce Say's law, because some people think that's gone all a kilter and that it ought to be, you know, there's some systems that might make it so that Say's law would be able to come into effect more than it has. But go ahead, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that's quite all right. You know, the core problem with markets, one of the core problems is the idea that it's really based on $1, one vote, not one person, one vote. And democracy is based on one person, one vote. So in a market-driven media system, those with more dollars have more votes. Those with no dollars have no votes. So we have the situation in the magazine industry, for example. Go to any magazine rack, and the vast majority of them are pitched at the top 20 or 30% of the population.
That's the market.
Yeah, because that's $1, one vote, not one person, one vote.
Right.
And you know, we had revolutions in this country and many other countries to overthrow the principle of $1, one vote, property-based rights, and to have democratic rights. So it's a very undemocratic mechanism viewed in that way, as a $1, one vote. Moreover, the media giants will give us what we want, but only within the range of what's profitable for them to produce, which is oftentimes a much narrower range than what people might actually want. In the 1930s, there's no doubt from historical evidence that no Americans wanted advertising, or few Americans wanted advertising on radio. But the private firms couldn't make any money giving advertising radio, so it wasn't an option they got to pick from. So it wasn't even a choice they had. They had to pick from one of the profitable routes. In 1995,
there was a time when we might have gone that way, perhaps, but it was a political thing.
No, it was a political thing. And once they got control, you got a choice of whether you're going to watch a show with Pepsodent ads or a show with Chevrolet ads. But you didn't get a choice of show without any ads whatsoever, which is the choice most Americans would have loved to have chosen. They weren't given that alternative.
How then would it have been financed, the whole thing?
Well, let's get to that later, because I mean, we're still in the middle of this point.
All right,
and so it's really, you give the people what they want within the range of what's profitable to produce, not within the range of what they might actually want. In 1995, the ad industry did a survey and discovered that 2/3 of Americans wanted no advertising on the internet. Now, if they're supposedly giving the people what they want, we wouldn't have any ads in the World Wide Web today. Well, obviously, that can't make any money giving the people what they want then, so you just forget what the people want when you can't make money off it. Bury it, put it in the bottom drawer, and give them what you want to make money off of, and then when they consume it, you tell them you're giving them what they want.
Could we come in then with the idea of, if you don't have ads, you don't have a way of getting income, then how is the enterprise of communications going to, in a certain sense, an economic sense, make an investment that is going to pay for itself and make progress and progress? How is it going to be done? If you don't,
put in simple English, how are you going to pay the bills?
Right,
because, I think that's the crucial issue, because obviously it takes resources and income and revenue to have a media enterprise. Well, I mean, I think to the extent we have non-commercial, non-profit media, especially in broadcasting, I think we need to have public money to subsidize it, and I would say there are various ways to generate that. I'm personally a major fan of having a tax on advertising and having all that money set aside to go directly into supporting nonprofit, non-commercial media of a whole different number of varieties, including public access television and community radio, in addition to national public radio and TV. So we can get all the corporate interest and all the right-wing guys in Congress who are constantly whipping public media out of the way, and really have a stable and viable nonprofit, non-commercial sector.
You think we could have a private sector, a profit sector of media, major mainline media. We could have a tax perhaps on that, or the advertising
I'd
part.
tax the
sort of like a
advertising.
Tobin tax in a certain sense of currency.
Yeah, I'd
but
tax the
a tax like
advertising.
that in order to support something like
a really strong, healthy, diverse, nonprofit, non-commercial
and
sector.
perhaps then a firewall between those two worlds in a
Well,
certain
actually,
sense, or not? Or would you see bleeding between the two?
I'm not done with that profit world. I got some stuff I do with those guys. I wouldn't let those guys be all
You
alone.
would not?
Not at all.
Okay.
I think it's absolutely indefensible to allow this level of concentration in media industries. When the United States occupied Japan and Germany in 1945, it instituted policies in both countries in the occupation to discourage media concentration. It said at the time that concentrated media was not only anti-democratic, it promoted fascism. I think we have to take a dose of our own medicine. I think we've got to come up with a viable antitrust plan to break up these concentrated media conglomerates. It's simply, there's no justification for having firms like Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, to name one, that is, you know, an enormous newspaper publisher, magazine publisher, owns a television network, film studios, book publishing, right on down I mean, break it up. There's no reason.
And this would imply over into internet and computers and so forth?
Yeah, I think
just
what we want is a competitive marketplace. Not, you know, we'd have in this country, in our media, we not only have a non-competitive oligopolistic marketplace, meaning dominated by a handful of firms. It's even more insidious than that.
Well, we could say we have an oligopolic economic system.
Yeah, that's right, largely.
Maybe highlighted or led by, and an example of the most oligopolic of that oligopoly is the media, perhaps.
That's right.
But it's a
even
general
worse
condition.
Than that, because
that's our condition.
If you take the 9 largest media firms in the United States, and they're Time Warner, Disney, Viacom, TCI, General Electric, Sony, which is a Japanese firm, but it's Media Industry US, Universal, which is owned by Seagram, News Corporation, CBS, which is owned by Westinghouse. If you take those 9 largest firms, and you look at them, what you find out is they average to have 6 joint ventures with the other 8 firms. That means with the other 8 firms of the first group of 9, each of them averages 6 equity joint ventures. They actually own projects with each other.
Yeah.
So it's much less like an oligopoly than like a cartel.
Yeah, it's like
they're carving up the turf.
Or carving up the world.
When something comes along like satellite television, rather than each of them competing, what you get is a situation like we have now with Primestar, where Rupert Murdoch cuts a deal with all the 5 largest cable companies. They go in together to have one company go into it rather than have 5 of them competing. So now we already only have 2 viable satellite services, DirecTV, which is linked with USSB, and Primestar. And it wouldn't be surprised, but that's a duopoly. It's supposed to be a booming market. You know, in a competitive market, you'd have 10 or 15 people competing. We're already down to 2.
It's a little hard.
Rupert Murdoch said it best, the head of News Corporation. He said, when I'm thinking about going into a new market, I've got 2 options. We can either go in with the competitors and kill each other and then make a deal, or we can make our deal first. Well, the rational thing is you make your deal first. So
go have a cup of coffee and a brandy in the back room and
why go on some $2 billion kamikaze run to make Milton Friedman happy? Hell no.
Right.
You're there to make your shareholders happy.
Yeah, and they are, and this is the pattern that's emerging. You got this concentration Mr. Van Dickian talks about to where it's down now to 10 or something, where it was 20, 50 or something like that. What's causing that, and what do we say to them who say, particularly on a world scale, that it's just the marketplace, the invisible hand, it's just the way things are evolving, and we only have so many car manufacturers in the world. I mean, it narrows down. That's the natural way in which business operates. We don't have 250 car manufacturers. We have 3 in the United States and on a world scale, and that sort of thing. What do we say to them in terms of the media monopoly that you're seeing?
Well, it is the natural way. I mean, the reason why we have fewer and fewer firms is that you make more money that way.
And there's efficiencies of scale.
Well, you make more money. I mean, there are some efficiencies, but primarily you have monopoly power in markets, which means you have less risk. I mean, the big lie of our economy is the idea that it's based on competition.
Entrepreneurs.
This is the stuff that Jack Kemp and Dan Quayle and Milton Friedman spoon-feed the population at election time every 2 or 4 years. But the truth of the matter is no intelligent capitalist wants competition. They do everything in their power to avoid it. They want everyone else to compete like the Dickens, but they want to have a monopoly. The reason why Bill Gates is worth $38 billion is because Bill Gates has had a virtual monopoly for the last 15 years. And the guy who's got the competitive hot dog stand on the street is probably worth $38. Bill Gates isn't a dummy. Monopoly, $38 billion, hot dog stand, 38. The smart thing for any capitalist is to get a monopoly as much as possible. That's the rational move.
From their perspective.
It reduces your risk, it reduces your competition, increases your profitability. And what these media, that's why firms get bigger and bigger. In media specifically, what firms have discovered is when they conglomerate, which is a relatively new phenomenon, when they own not just TV networks and TV stations, but they also own film studios and cable channels and cable systems.
And publishing.
And publishing and newspapers.
Books.
What they're able to do is the profit whole for a media conglomerate is vastly larger than the sum of the profit parts of the individual parts.
Synergies.
The classic case in point is a company like Disney.
Yeah.
It made a film in 1994 that I'm sure a lot of the viewers are familiar with called The Lion King.
Sure.
The Lion King was one of the greatest hits in cinema history at the box office. It did in the global box office somewhere between $600 and $700 million in business. Now, do you know that's its revenues? That's before you take any cost out. Do you know how much profit Disney's going to make in The Lion King?
I really don't.
Well,
know.
guess.
No, I don't.
Well, guess. Come on. This is a test.
You mean on a percentage basis?
No,
Or no?
raw dollars.
Raw
They had $700 million in global box office. Guess how much profit
Oh,
they're
I
going to
don't
make from
know.
it?
You'd make a reasonable, maybe 100,000 or something, or 100 million.
No, they're going to make $1 billion in profit.
How?
Well, that's what
Out of more than.
well,
explain this to me,
well,
Professor.
this is the genius of conglomerate media.
Yeah.
Because they don't just make money off global box office. They also make money by having Lion King paraphernalia and merchandise that they sell at the 500 Disney stores.
Yeah.
By having Lion King rides for their amusement parks, Lion King CD-ROMs, Lion King books and comic books, Lion King show for the Disney Channel, Lion King show for their ABC network.
Right.
On
Stuffed
and on.
animals,
LionKing
yes.
CDs and music. On and on.
Yeah.
And what it means in another case,
Kitsch.
when they have there are 3 animated films since they made Lion King. Hercules,
and
Pocahontas, and Hunchback of Notre Dame have all been real bow wows at the box office by their earlier standard, $200 million globally.
Yeah.
But you know how much profit they're probably each going to generate for Disney?
No.
Now that you understand
No,
the
I
system,
don't.
guess.
I don't know. More than
$500 million.
Wow.
Because
okay.
of all those other revenue streams.
Right.
Now, the reason why this is important to understand, this explains why no other, if you're going to compete with Disney making animated films, you've better be able to have all those other revenue streams. Otherwise, your margin of error is going to be way too small. It means you're going to, if you make $200 million on a animated film and you don't have those other revenue streams, you can't compete with Disney.
Right.
You just simply aren't going to be able to get investors. So the only people who can compete with them are going to be News Corporation or Time Warner, who've got all those other streams. That's why the independent media firm doesn't survive. You've got to be linked up to one of these chains or you just don't have a future. That's where the profits come in. That's the logic of this market.
Yeah, we've had that. We had robber barons, and we had, you know, Teddy Roosevelt came along, and the progressive antitrust kind of things and other aspects of the economy and so forth. And then we had a Great Depression. We had this Great Depression back in the 20s, and we had a whole lot of things that came out of Washington in the sense that a lot of people who are free market, free marketers and so forth were a little exception to the Securities and Exchange Commission and all these regulatory things, including Federal Communications Commission and so forth, putting all these government regulations upon the system. Where does all that fit in?
Well, you know, I got bad news. I told you how they really don't care about competition. They don't really care about free markets either. That's also more mumbo jumbo. They spoon feed us at election time, so we'll vote for their politicians. In fact, these firms, as we said earlier, are some of the biggest recipients of government largesse. They're only concerned about free markets when government regulation might hurt their profitability.
Well, sure, that's when they would be.
Yeah, but I mean,
it's getting in
the
way of my being.
I mean, these firms get phenomenal subsidies right now. In fact, the major media giants, all of whom own commercial television stations and networks, are getting the recipients of spectrum to do digital broadcasting, 6 megahertz of spectrum that is valued anywhere from $10 or $15 billion at the lowest end to $100 billion at the high end. They're going to be getting this for free, for nothing in return. And the whole thing has been done on the sly with virtually no publicity.
Well, they're going to have this huge auction on December 10th of LMDS.
Yeah, well, this isn't broadcast, though.
Yeah, no, it's not broadcast, but it's going to be relevant to communications.
Yeah, it's relevant to communications, but the interesting thing is...
It maybe bring some competition in, maybe LMDS.
Listen, the point here, though, is that broadcasters are the one type of communication groups that use spectrum that don't have to pay for it.
Yeah, that's true.
And the reason they don't have to pay for it isn't because there's any reason for it. There is no defensible reason. The reason simply is they have the most powerful lobby in Washington. The Wall Street Journal, 17 days ago from when we're taping this, on their front page called the commercial broadcasting industry the most powerful lobby in Washington. They floss their teeth with politicians' underpants. They own these guys. They basically rule in Washington, and they're getting this massive gift of government property for doing nothing in return. And it's a true scandal. And this is the free, so they don't care about the free market. And there are actually a handful of politicians in Washington who are upset about this. John McCain has been upset. A couple others. But for the most part, this lobby is so strong that no politician dares mess with them because it's political suicide.
So where's it all heading?
Well, in what sense?
In the sense of the communications future of this country and the world.
Well, I think the current trajectory we have with a highly corporate concentrated commercial system is negative.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at the journalism that this system generates. Where does journalism factor into the operations of a Time Warner or Disney? What sort of role does journalism play? Well, it's nowhere to be found unless it's something you can make money off of. In commercial-driven journalism, we see what that looks like. And it's a two-tier level of journalism. On one hand, you get a fairly sophisticated journalism aimed towards the business class and the upper middle class, sort of what you get in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times or Business Week.
Bloomberg, or something that's pretty good, actually.
It's relatively good, but
because it serves a purpose,
it's good at one level, but it also has the needs and prejudices of the class it represents.
Yeah.
So it's going to be aimed at investors and business and assume their sort of worldview.
Yeah.
So it's good quality, but it also has its limits by its values and its assumptions serving that market.
And the people in there had better just subsume those values, or they're not going to be in there very long.
As for the rest of the population, increasingly the caliber of journalism is nothing short of disastrous. I mean, it's Lorena Buttafuoco and you know, that crowd, O.J. Simpson, Marv Albert, and it's a journalism that almost has no investigative work whatsoever.
Well, that's back again. They all try and argue, and they say it's the dumber and dumbing of society and so forth, and that, it is that's tabloid, the tabloid argumentation, that they're going to put tabloids, London has these terrible tabloids as well as having the Times of London and so forth, and that's what the people want, and they make money at it.
Actually, they won't tell you that. They would never tell you that. There's not a single journalist in this country who will tell you, defend it, that they're giving people what they want. No, not necessarily the journalists,
but the publishers would say they're giving them, again, what they
see,
want.
This is clearly a case. This has nothing to do with the public wants. There's no survey that confirms that.
Well, they would say the market serves.
I know the argument.
Yeah,
we've made that out.
Okay.
No, what they would say basically is, look, the reason they give us Lorena Buttafuoco stories
because it
and
sells
Marv
magazines.
Let me finish. Right. The reason it's supply side, because it's cheap. It's extremely cheap. Putting a camera in the O.J. courtroom doesn't cost a thing. Going out and having 10 journalists go out and do some investigative work costs a pile of money. And if it's any good, it's going to piss off someone in power. And if you're running a business, you want to keep your costs low and you don't want to piss off people in power. So journalism is just a non-starter. Take press releases that come in from PR firms that account now for 40 to 70% of our news. Take those press releases, then go put a mic in front of a politician's mouth, go cover a crime story you get off the satellite, cover Lorena Buttafuoco stories and Marv Albert. That stuff, it's cheap, it doesn't cost much, it doesn't piss off anyone in power, and if people watch it, then you're giving the people what they want, but it's really supply-side driven. If that stuff was really expensive, it wouldn't be down the air. It's there because it's cheap, period, and it doesn't piss off anyone in power. Don't forget that.
Anybody
because
this
this system is predicated, despite all this mumbo-jumbo they feed us about these big corporations being concerned about government, they don't want to antagonize powerful people around the world because they need them to help set them up and subsidize them. So right now we've got, in the case of the global media, a company like Disney, which in a rare bout of doing something decent is releasing a film that's critical of China's takeover of Tibet in the next month. And Disney has done everything in its power to assure the Chinese leaders it will never make that mistake again of releasing a film critical of China. That it has hired Henry Kissinger to go to China on behalf of Disney to represent its interests, to assure them that Disney will never mess with the Chinese government again, because the Chinese market is one they're desperate to get into. And all the media giants are on all fours to get into that market. And
sure, it's a big market.
And Rupert Murdoch, one of the main owners of a news firm in this world, took the BBC off of his satellite services going to China because it pissed off the Chinese leaders. This is where journalism fits into their worldview. It's nowhere.
From the standpoint of the media giants and the people who are running it and the people who own it and so forth, they are doing what makes sense to them. They are not doing, they're doing it. It may have consequences that you and I may disagree with, but from their standpoint, it makes perfectly good sense.
I don't know about their editors and reporters. I think that it's clear this is a system that's perfectly rational from the vantage point of shareholders and advertisers,
and owners,
especially
and
shareholders,
and the people, the elite, the media elite.
Well, let's say the shareholders. Period. Let's just leave it. That's what makes sense.
Okay, the owners.
Set up for
the owners. Let's get back to good old ownership.
That's the shareholders. But that doesn't mean it's sane for citizenry in a democratic society. My argument simply is, isn't that these are bad people or mean people. Michael Eisner might be a wonderful human being for all I know. He might be a sweet, loving man. He's probably very nice to his children and his pets, and I'm sure he gives to charities and jogs and does all sorts of nice things. The point simply is in pursuing their corporate objectives, which are to maximize value for the shareholders, the sort of things they do are very detrimental for a democratic society, and that's why it's a political issue that we have to address.
It is a political issue, and whether or not it'll be able to catch up with itself, whether a system can catch up with itself, downsizing has been going on. It still is. The global economy, I saw the head of Tony Hall, he's the head of chairman, I guess, of BBC, and he said the globalization, the issue is not being raised nearly enough, the significance of it. He quoted Paul Kennedy up at Yale, saying we got 250 million people in North America, Europe, and the Tigers, and they're used to getting $90 a day or something for whatever it is they do in the name of labor to get income, and you got 1.5 billion people who work for $2 or $3 a day, and that there's going to be a convergence of wages. There's going to be a pressure upon wages of people in the developed world. It's going to create political difficulties. It's going to create political anxiety and angst. We're in a time where everything's going well now at this moment, but give it a little downturn or something, there's going to be a great deal of angst and so forth. You don't think within the normal operating political or economic operating system of the country that somebody would be able to come in and tap into the angst of that, whether it's at a political or at an economic level, and make it be a winning proposition in terms of the capitalist system in order to address the outrage or the upset, either in political or economic terms, of a mass number of people who are going to be disadvantaged in a very serious way by the normal operation. The thing, it goes to the extent of its limits, and it reaches some limit beyond which it goes, and then you're into a new situation, and a new dynamic can emerge within the context that we have, market economy that we have.
I don't know if that was a heck of a question.
Was it? I don't know. You know what I'm saying is that, well, you know what I'm saying is that, somebody may come, it gets so bad that somebody will be able to come along and make a profit out of taking an alternative view to the one that everybody is involved in
So
now.
a business would come along, not a politician.
Business or politics. They're sort of interlinked, aren't they?
They're very closely interlinked. Yeah, well, I think we're in a period of a tremendous tumult. I mean, I think that it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen in a situation like this. I think, though, we're in a situation now where the dominant firms are in power. They enjoy considerable influence politically, and they're the main beneficiaries of the current global economic situation. A company, it's not a coincidence that the largest media firms are strong advocates of the sort of trade deals like NAFTA and GATT and the creation of groups like the World Trade Organization, because they're the primary beneficiaries of it. And therefore, it's not a pure surprise that our media system does a really atrocious job of really covering that sort of issue, giving it balance and giving background so people can have an informed decision on it. In 1994, for example, the Washington Post editorialized on a daily basis almost, supporting the GATT deal and the creation of the World Trade Organization, and accusing people who didn't favor that of being just real morons who knew nothing about
They just don't understand
economics. Well, it came out, the Wall Street Journal discovered that if GATT passed, the Washington Post would be the beneficiaries of $1 billion in new business because of its telecom service that would benefit by overseas.
Big incentive.
And when they approached the editors of the Washington Post, said, "Do you realize you guys are going to benefit by $1 billion?"
That's just incidental.
No. The editors said, no, we had no idea, and I'm sure they didn't. I'm sure they genuinely believed in GATT. But the point is, people who didn't believe in GATT would never have risen in the hierarchy. They would be weeded out along the way.
And they might self-censor themselves.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's not even self-censor. That's you internalize the values. And you get weeded out along the way if you're not going to fit in with the flow. So I think that, the system we have is one in which the values of the dominant institutions permeate the heart of the system, especially the top post where the most important decisions are made. And that, we live in a highly inegalitarian society.
Yes, that should be made. That point should be made and understood. I mean, particularly economically, in terms of distribution of wealth.
Not just economically,
everybody gets one vote.
Too.
Yeah, well, politically, only 50% of the people bother to vote nowadays.
In 1994, only 38% of the electorate voted in the so-called Republican Revolution, heavily disproportionate on the basis of class and income. I mean, that's
a lot of people
look at the top
it out,
10% of the population in terms of income. It's 80 or 90% voter participation. Bottom 10%, 10%, and it goes right on down on class basis. If we had 70-80% voter participation and people voted the same way, but everyone voted, we'd probably have a vastly left-wing government.
Yeah, Roosevelt came along in 1932, and he was called a traitor to his class because he was part of the leadership element and so forth. We have leadership element. we have Ted Turner. We have other kinds of people. We have people who make up that media leadership. Do you think there's ever going to be able to emerge, or if there is an alternative that can come along other than this dismal pattern that we see now? We spoke earlier about a commercial and then maybe a non-commercial kind of element and so forth. Where is the leadership for that going to come? Is it going to be able to have any possibility of being other than a just hopelessly outgunned David against a gigantic Goliath? Or are you going to have to make allegiances with people that have some sort of a link with that system, that are in that system, and use that system in order to do it? We just had Barbara Aaron right here earlier, and she was saying we need to generate a sense of war against the institution of war itself, or have a, do you understand what I'm trying to say? How do we address the system in a way that's going to benefit the people of this country and the world, in your view?
If we want to change the media and make it more democratic and change our, I think it's going to have to be part and parcel of a broad movement to change the core institutions of our society.
Okay,
and I think that media is not a strong enough organizing principle to generate popular
economics. We need a new economic rationale.
I think it has to be part of like really reforming our whole political economy to make it more egalitarian, more fair, more just, and more sane, more environmentally sane. And I think that if we look around the world at the people who are trying to change and having some success changing media, who are they? They tend to be groups that are not isolated media activist groups, but they're groups that are linked with religious groups, labor, civic organizations, feminist, environmental groups, creating broad coalitions of people who their media might not be their most important issue, but they understand if they don't have reform of media, nothing they're working on can ever be successful.
Right, because,
And what we're seeing along those lines around the world in countries like New Zealand and Sweden and India and Canada is that there's a whole group of democratic left electoral parties in the 1990s that are emerging that oppose these sort of free market, quote unquote, neoliberal policies. And what's interesting about these parties is that they're making reform of the media one of their central issues. I mean, it's not something way down the list. In this country, unfortunately, the equivalents to those groups are very small to begin with, or barely existent, ranging from the new third-party groups like the Greens and the Labor Party and the New Party to the Progressive Caucus in Congress. But still, those groups, even the small ones, as small as they are, barely have any understanding of the importance of media. It doesn't even show up on their Richter scale for the most part. So we've got a lot of work to do there.
At the basis of political economy, you said that before, the Greens and so forth, we have, you know, economic theory. We have Schumpeter, we have Marx, we have Keynes, we have a view of things. Mr. Clinton has a certain view. Tony Blair is coming along with him over the idea of privatization and this kind of thing. Do you think the context within which political decision-making and economic, at a level of economic theory, is sufficient, or it gives us a basis for a context of understanding that is sufficient for us to change in some sort of a fundamental way, in a way that we're going to be able to address these problems? Or do we need some sort of a new system of economic thinking that perhaps could, well, I have an idea that we really need to have to spread some, viable holdings and ownership, rather than doing away with ownership, we have to spread ownership of technological systems to people in order to give them an alternative way to have income other than just their labor input, as labor becomes less and less relevant to a productive process as technology takes over, a binary system of economics. But do we need some sort of a new economic system, or do we have it within the context of a leftist or a traditionally socialist critique of the capitalist rebooting kind of thing, or what do you see? Well, at a theoretical economic level.
Well, I'm not an economist.
Oh,
so
but you say law and that sort of thing.
But never stops me from saying whatever I want. Don't worry. I think the current economy we have is a disastrous one. I mean, it's very good at certain things.
For the folks,
It's very good at certain things, but I think it's an irrational system that makes no sense and it has no future. Environmentally and socially, every sign points to disaster down the road because it's not a very well thought out or very rational system. So, I mean, I think we need to make it a much more egalitarian and democratic economy. I think we need to somehow take resources and investment. Instead of having it be the province of 1% of the population, we've got to somehow get the employees, the workers, the consumers involved in the process of deciding where investment's going to go and how it's going to be used.
Do you think we also have to get them, do we, in a traditional socialist critique would critique the institution of private property itself, or a Marxist critique would say that's the institution that we have to do away with because that causes the concentration and the inequities and so forth. But do we want to, in that view, do we want to do away with private property as a system undergirding an economic system, or do we want to perhaps spread ownership, instead of it being 1% or 5% owning it, if you had 100% of the people owning the capital assets of an economy as a way of distributing income? Is there any value in trying to think of spreading ownership and then perhaps creating
once we agree on the principle that the current system isn't working and that we want a more fair, egalitarian, and democratic system, I think we can have a great debate and ask a lot of people to talk about various ideas.
Right.
I'm open for that discussion. I don't really have the answer to that, but I do think it's doable. I mean, I think the big lie of our times that overwhelms everyone in our society is the idea that this system is locked in concrete, is unchangeable, when in fact anything but that is the case. And I think when people understand that we can actually change the system, we have in the past, and understand that, you know, we don't have to be powerless vegetables on the couch with a remote in one hand and a bag of chips under our arm, that we could make an economy that serves us instead of serving those who own the country.
Right, and it might be, well, it might be that we could become those who own the country. That's what I was getting at in a certain sense, rather than having the system of economics. Somebody make an investment. They make an investment that pays for itself out of its future earnings 4 to 5 years out, and they've just got a thing where it just keeps building up the income, and people don't have that. They only have labor. And then the other thing with the globalization process is one big development that's going on. You also have a potential technological displacement that's coming, where the technological systems of super automation and super mass production of mass-produced goods and services don't require human beings nearly to the degree that they have. So a system of distributing income based upon labor input to a system that's becoming technological might need to have some sort of a rethinking of it through. And those on the left have been tied to a dialectic of seeing labor against capital. And
well,
you understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying.
That's a difficult...
I think you might be right about the fact that labor is less of a factor of production in the long term, but it's certainly still an awfully important factor of production. And I think all the evidence we still have today shows that the conflict between labor and capital is still right at the heart of the system, because as long as you're trying to make profit, the less you pay labor, the more profit you make, and you're competing with people who are doing the same thing. It's built right into the system. You're going to pay as little as possible.
What about the
inescapable.
What about the thing? We've got somebody on the right, as you would say, George Gilders, going around talking now about the wonders of the microprocessor and so forth. But he takes the idea, and Bucky Fuller used to do it as well, that we come into a situation where we are, and they used to talk about cable. We used to talk about cable here briefly. We used to talk about the cable as a system of abundance rather than of scarcity, and that's why you can have public access.
Anymore, do you?
Well, no, but I would talk to it. You have more and more channel capacity. You have convergence. You have the possibility of digital new channels developing. You got the LMDS right down the line coming and so forth. But the idea that we're transcending in a bandwidth sense or in a telecommunication sense scarcity itself as a reality, that we could have a great many different channels of capacity, and is there a possibility in that there would be a realm for the opening up of or expressions of the human spirit that don't fit into the commercial pattern, but there's a realm where the real activity of human beings and human activity would take place, maybe like in public access or public theater or something like that. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I know
Would there
exactly
be
what
this
you're saying.
mass-produced world over here that we could have an ownership of, have some income to buy the stuff that they turn out, and then we could be free to do things that are really human and humane in another realm of things as they're developing.
I don't think that's going to happen, and I'll tell you why. Because it's not a technologically driven society. Even if the technology holds that potential, it's whoever controls the technology and owns it is going to really be the one who develops it. Television is the classic case in point. With digital broadcasting, where we currently get, in New York, you probably get 6, 7 channels over the air, terrestrial TV, maybe 8 at the outside. Well, when digital broadcasting comes along, suddenly you're going to be able to get over the air 50, 60, 70 channels in the same amount of spectrum that you currently get 8.
Right.
Now, the way the systems work, thanks to the NAB, is instead of having 60 or 70 new owners in addition to the current 8, the current 8 owners or 7, whatever it is in New York, are each going to own 10 stations each. That's what it's going to be. So you're not that
pattern can't hold.
And I think also the internet, we're seeing there that the commercial interests and the corporate interests, in the past year, they were scared by the threat of the internet, have been able to use their immense market power to neutralize the threat of the internet, and I think increasingly bring it right inside the heart of their empires, so it will not undercut them, but they can use it to gird their power and increase it.
So what is your 1, 2, 3? What should we do in your view?
I think the
what are the major forces?
The points we talked about early on. If obviously we have to build a movement, we've got to educate people, we've got to talk about it, understand it's an issue, it's of importance to begin with. But as we do that, what we talk about is breaking up these largest media firms, antitrust, talk about really establishing a fully funded public broadcasting system that includes national system and network, but local stations controlled locally, public access and community. I think it means having decent regulation of commercial broadcasting, which means no ads to kids, having ad-free kids shows, and no ads on news programs. I don't think there's any defense for commercially run news programs. I mean, television journalism now on commercial broadcasting in this country is nothing short of a scandal, and we need real journalism. So those are the sort of things we can start with right there.
Yeah, and then we want to do that. We build a mass movement in these kind of things. You have nucleus of that. We have some assistance from things that are going on overseas and so forth, and there's discontent within the society.
My experience is
or
that,
are
yeah,
people
I think there's tremendous openness to these ideas when people talk about them. The problem, of course, is where are people going to learn about criticism of the media, except in the media where it's not covered.
Yeah.
There, the only opposition to the media you get is the official opposition, which is the media liberals. This is, we hear this incessantly. You turn on your radio or turn on CNN, and you've got Rush Limbaugh, Gordon Liddy, and Bob Novak, all telling us how liberal the media is. And you're wondering, where are these liberals? All we're getting are these people telling us how liberal they are. And that's the official opposition. But when I talk to people and they get an explanation for why they're getting carpet bombed with ads, for why the news stinks, and they sort of study it and listen and talk about it, then the sort of stuff I'm suggesting probably on the surface seems outlandish. Breaking up these big firms, public broadcasting, no ads to kids. They seem perfectly rational at that point. People say, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
You're going to break
What's stopping that?
You're going to break up these big companies and so forth through governmental intervention into
through
antitrust. Through antitrust. And you think there's going to be able to be political support for that, given the lobby and given the power and so forth?
Unless you have grassroots support, it'd never happen. These lobbies are way too strong. But I will say this, I've yet to meet a single American who's not an owner of one of these companies who, when acquainted with the statistics, and say, I think it'd be a very good idea to break these firms up.
Really? They'll say that, right?
If they are acquainted with the facts.
Yeah.
If you go up to a stranger in the street right now and said, hey, antitrust media, they look at you like you were speaking Greek or Stone because they know nothing about it.
Where are these issues being discussed adequately? We've got National Public Radio things come up. We do have a little bit of nascent things with these access cable. You appreciate and encourage access cable television and so forth, and people at the voluntary level doing things?
There's spectacular growth in media activism in this country. In the last 10 years ago, a conversation like this would have been impossible on our media. 10 years ago, a group like Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting didn't exist. Today, it's an enormous, respected media watch group that publishes a terrific magazine called Extra. 10 years ago, you didn't have an organized labor movement that had people really interested in media issues. You just had a bunch of people who couldn't care less. 10 years ago, you didn't have local media watch groups in some of the largest cities of this country monitoring what's going on in the media, the ownership, the public stations, trying for fairness. And now we've got that in New York and Chicago and the Twin Cities and Denver and Seattle and Los Angeles, and there's lots of other cities. This is all a recent phenomenon. There's a real momentum building. It's a dramatic change. If you think historically, it's very positive sign.
Yeah, that's really good. And we did have this, we have these islands of capacity within access. Let's talk cable access. We did have this nascent kind of thing with deep dish. I wonder if there's going to be any possibility of beginning to try and link some of that together with some of the satellite technologies.
I think so.
What is it, a matter of economics primarily?
Somewhat economics primarily, because the people who do this great stuff like deep dish are invariably working crazy schedules and not getting paid much. And you just don't have the resources to do that. But I mean, it's going to come. I think the logic of making these alliances is there for alternative and independent media, so we have stronger networks and better product for people to experience.
Good deal. And as people get more alienated, people begin to listen and they hear this and read your books and everything, there'll be more and more of a constituency for that
reading
sort of
my
thing.
books.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say
that, that first.
Let's let them say again what it is. What the books are. There's one is the corporate media and the threat to democracy.
Very good.
And the other one is the global
media.
The global media with George Herman.
Edward Herman.
Edward Herman, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Ed.
But you're a pleasure to have had the Perceptions in. I really thank you for coming in. It's been a pleasure. Glad to welcome you to the Manhattan Cable Network, Manhattan Neighborhood Network new studios and so forth here in New York. Hope the conference goes very well here in October 1997. It's been your pleasure to have the Perceptions of Robert McChesney. He's a professor at Madison, I guess, University of Wisconsin, a writer on these issues, and somebody who gives us a view of these things that is really very good for us to have. Thank you really very much for coming on up for the program. We appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
Okay, we on Conversations will see you again next week. We'll be back again next week. That's been our pleasure to give you his views, and we invite you to tune in again next week at the same time. Thank you very much. Until next time.
All right.
Okay, now we're just got
I got a race out here.
Okay.
I'm way late. I'm just
well, you're just about. We got just about a couple of seconds.
Sure.
You'll just about make it. I think you'll just make it here. This is New York City minute time.
Yeah, well, it's,
you just make it. I think
rush hour, and
I know.
60 blocks.
Best to go up 11th. I think maybe.
No,
he's got to grab a cab quick. He's got to get a cab.
Unless someone wants to drive me.
There's
I'm
a conference
game.
that's downtown. We're still on the air. So are you working on a new book or anything? Or?
Yeah, I'm writing a bunch of stuff.
All right,
yeah.
good. I got to be in touch. You got a card? Maybe
No, sorry,
you don't
I
have
don't.
it. Okay, well I'll find out how to get in touch with
Yeah,
you.
I'm easy
Where's
to get
it all
hold of.
taking place down there? NYU?
It's
or
all
Cooper
over
Union?
NYU,
Yeah.
Cooper Union and the law school and the student center.
Okay, I'll get some literature to you, and I'm going to get the books, and so I'll be in touch with you. I can get your number from Jeff Cohen or something.
Yeah, and
or
it's
your
in the
address?
he's got everything, and it's in the directory too.
Okay, good. We want to be in touch with you, and let me know when you come back through New York again. Huh?
Okay,
we'll be
I will.
in touch. You know.
What's the